What a man thinks of himself is what he becomes. If a man constantly tells himself he is weak, unlucky, incapable, or destined to fail, his actions will begin to reflect those beliefs. He will fail, doubt himself, and live his life in fear. But when a man begins to see himself as capable, disciplined, and valuable, his mindset starts to change. He becomes more focused, more confident, and more disciplined toward his goals. Slowly, he begins to act like the man he once only imagined becoming. And same applies to the people around us. The words you speak to your children, your family, and your friends matter more than you realize. If you constantly tell someone they are a failure, that they are not smart enough, strong enough, or capable enough, eventually they may begin to believe it themselves. Even a person with great potential can be broken by constant discouragement. Parents should inspire their children to believe in themselves. They should remind them that they are capable, that they can grow, improve, and achieve great things through effort and persistence. Encouragement builds confidence. Confidence builds action, and action changes a life. A man is not only shaped by what he thinks of himself, he shapes others by what he thinks of them. This is the responsibility most men have never fully reckoned with. So what the self-image actually is. The self-image is the picture a man carries of himself, a settled sense of the kind of man he is, what he is capable of, what he deserves from the world, what the world will give him in return for his effort. Most men did not create this self-image consciously. It was built slowly over the years through experiences, failures, victories, criticism, encouragement, and the voices of the people around them. A father's words, a teacher's opinion, the way people reacted when he succeeded, the way they treated him when he failed. Some men were taught to believe in themselves. Others were taught, directly or indirectly, that they were not good enough, not smart enough, or not capable of achieving much in life. Many men carry those old voices into adulthood without realizing it. A man who was constantly criticized may grow into someone who doubts every decision he makes. A man who was told he would never become anything may begin to live as though that prediction were true. Even when opportunities appear, he hesitates. Even when he has talent, fear holds him back. But the opposite is also true. When a man is encouraged, trusted, and reminded of his potential, something inside him begins to grow. He starts to believe he can improve. He becomes willing to try, willing to fail, willing to keep moving forward. Confidence changes the way a man walks through life. The self-image functions as a thermostat. Whatever level of achievement, income, or happiness it has been set to, consciously or not, a man's behavior will drift back toward that level. He may rise above it temporarily. He will find a way, without quite knowing he is doing so, to return. Why the thermostat is so reliable. The reason the thermostat is so reliable is because the self-image works quietly in the background of a man's life. Most of the time, he is not even aware of it. It shapes the way he interprets everything that happens to him. A man with a poor self-image will often ignore encouragement and focus only on failure. A compliment feels fake to him, but criticism feels true. He avoids challenges, not because he is lazy, but because deep down he does not believe he is capable of more. But a man with a strong and healthy self-image sees life differently. He learns from failure without letting it define him. He accepts growth, believes improvement is possible, and keeps moving forward even when things are difficult. And over time, those beliefs shape his actions. His actions shape his habits, and his habits shape the life he lives. That is how the self-image becomes a man's reality. So how the wrong picture costs a man his life. A man who holds a picture of himself as less capable than he is will not pursue the things that would confirm his greater capability. He will not apply for the position that requires more than he has demonstrated so far. He will not attempt the work that exceeds his current proven competence. He will stay, year after year, within the boundaries of what his self-image has declared acceptable, which is to say, within the boundaries of what he has already done. And because he stays within those boundaries, the evidence that might revise the picture never accumulates. He does not discover that he could have handled the larger position because he never took it. He does not discover that the more demanding work was within his reach because he never reached. The picture remains unchallenged, and unchallenged, it calcifies. At 50, the man is living by a self-image formed at 25, shaped by the limited understanding of a younger man in narrower circumstances, and he has never seriously questioned whether it still applies. The most expensive belief a man can hold is the belief that he is less than he is. It costs him quietly every day, not in money he fails to earn, but in the man he fails to become. The particular cost of the unexpressed capability. One of the greatest tragedies in life is having real potential, but never fully expressing it. Some men have moments where their true capability appears. In certain situations, they become focused, confident, disciplined, and capable of extraordinary work. For a brief moment, they rise above their usual limits, but then slowly, they fall back into old habits and old ways of thinking. Not because they are lazy, not because they lack talent, but because deep down, their self-image does not allow them to consistently believe they are that man. Many people spend years living below their true potential because they accepted limits that were placed on them by others long ago. After a while, those limits no longer feel like opinions. They begin to feel like reality. The words we speak to others. A man's self-image does not stay inside him. It travels. It enters every room he occupies and settles on the people he speaks to, through the words he chooses, the expectations he holds, the verdict he renders, sometimes without a word, on the people closest to him. Consider what a man who has been told, repeatedly and convincingly, that he is not capable eventually becomes. Consider the particular damage of being told by the people whose opinion matters most. A parent, a teacher, a person whose judgment a child cannot yet question, that he is not smart enough, not strong enough, not the kind of person to whom success naturally comes. The child does not have the equipment to evaluate this verdict. He cannot step back and examine the source. He cannot distinguish between a tired parent's frustration and a considered assessment of his actual potential. He receives the words, and because they come from authority, he tends to believe them, and belief in a child is the beginning of identity. I have seen men in their 40s still conducting their working lives by the verdict of a father who died 20 years ago, still hearing, in the quiet moments, the voice that said they would not amount to much. Still proving unconsciously that the old assessment was correct, not because it was, but because it was absorbed before they had the judgment to reject it. The words we speak to the people we love are the most powerful things we possess. They build or they diminish. They rarely simply pass through. The responsibility of the parent. Of all the relationships in which this principle operates, none carries more weight than the relationship between a parent and a child. A parent is a child's first and most authoritative source of information about himself. Before the child has any independent means of evaluation, he is learning from the people who care for him what he is. A parent who makes a habit of voicing disappointment, who corrects readily and praises sparingly, who responds to failure with discouragement and to success with something short of genuine acknowledgement, is not simply commenting on the child's performance. He is contributing to the picture the child carries of himself, and that picture will govern far more of the child's adult life than the parent ever intended to influence. This is not an argument for false praise. A child who is told he has done excellent work when he is not served by the reassurance. He is given inaccurate information that will eventually conflict with the world's assessment, and the collision will be harder for the false foundation beneath it. It is an argument for honest encouragement, for making visible to the child the capability that is genuinely there, even when the current performance does not yet fully reflect it, for treating effort as evidence of quality and failure as information rather than verdict. For being the voice in a child's life that says, consistently and with conviction, you are capable of this, perhaps not yet, but you are capable. A child who grows up hearing that message, who has absorbed before the world begins its own commentary, a settled belief in his own capability, enters adult life with an advantage that no financial inheritance can match. He has a self-image built on genuine encouragement rather than criticism, and that self-image will filter the evidence of his adult life very differently from the self-image built on doubt. The responsibility beyond the family. This principle does not end at the front door. A man who manages other men is shaping self-images. The employer who tells a capable employee that his work is ordinary consistently will eventually produce an employee who believes it and who performs accordingly, having no reason to believe otherwise. The mentor who sees in a younger person a quality that the younger person has not yet seen in himself and who names it clearly and seriously may alter the course of that person's working life. Every man who speaks to other men, in whatever capacity, at whatever level, is either confirming or challenging the picture those men carry of themselves. The words are never neutral. They land somewhere, and where they land matters more than most men have ever stopped to consider. So how a man changes his self-image. The self-image can be changed. This is the most important practical truth about it, and the one most often underemphasized. The picture that was assembled by other people's words and a younger man's limited experience is not a permanent fixture. It is a working document, and a man who understands how it was built can, with genuine effort and genuine patience, revise it. Not quickly. This is worth stating plainly. A self-image that has been 30 years in formation will not be revised in a week. The revision is slow work, slow in the way that all genuine change is slow, not because the principle is complicated, but because the habits of thought that maintain the old picture are deeply grooved and return easily. But slow is not the same as impossible, and even the earliest stages of revision produce changes in conduct that produce changes in result that provide the new evidence on which a better picture can begin to be built. The first step is a man must look honestly at the picture he currently carries, not as a general impression, but in specific terms. What does he believe himself capable of? What does he believe himself unworthy of? Where in his daily conduct does he hold back in ways that the available evidence does not actually require? And where did those beliefs come from? Who spoke them, in what circumstances, and was the speaker in a position to know? The deliberate revision. The second step is deliberate revision. A man must construct with as much specificity as the examination allowed a more accurate picture of what he is capable of, based not on the old verdict, but on the actual evidence of his best moments, his genuine achievements, the qualities that other people who are in a position to judge have recognized in him. This picture must be written. It must be read every morning before the day begins and the old habits of thought reassert themselves, not as a performance. A man reading words he does not believe produces nothing useful, but as a genuine act of directing the mind's attention toward what is actually true rather than what the old picture has been insisting is true. William James, the finest psychologist this country produced in the last century, wrote that the greatest discovery of his generation was that a man could alter his life simply by altering his attitude of mind. He was not speaking loosely. He was describing with precision the mechanism we have been examining today. The picture changes. The filter changes. The evidence that passes through the filter is interpreted differently. The conduct that follows the interpretation is different. And the results, measured across months and years, change in ways that seem, to the outside observer, almost inexplicable. The daily conduct. The third step is the most demanding. A man must begin to act in the small daily moments, in the ordinary choices that nobody observes, as the man the revised picture describes. Not waiting until he feels like that man. Not waiting until the picture feels fully real. Acting as though it is real now, with the understanding that the feeling of reality follows from the action rather than preceding it. A man does not feel capable and therefore act capably. He acts capably on the days when it costs him something to do so, and the feeling of genuine capability grows from the evidence that the action provides. This is the mechanism in reverse. The same process that built the limiting picture can build the accurate one. The evidence accumulates, the picture updates, the conduct shifts, the results follow. By the reliable, unhurried correspondence between what a man genuinely believes himself to be and the life that belief produces. From today, from this hour, if a man is willing, he can begin to speak differently to the people whose self-images he influences. To the child who is struggling and needs to hear that struggling is not the same as failing. To the colleague whose capability he has privately recognized but never named. To the person who has been operating under a verdict that was never theirs to carry, and that a single honest word from someone they trust could begin to dissolve. This is not sentiment. It is the practical application of everything we have covered. If the picture a man holds of himself determines the life he produces, then the picture he helps others hold of themselves determines theirs. He is, in every significant relationship of his life, either building or diminishing someone's capacity to live fully. Words, once spoken to someone who trusts you, are never simply words. They become part of the picture that person carries of himself. Speak accordingly. The encouragement costs nothing. The silence, maintained when encouragement was needed, costs everything. And again, speak carefully. To your children, if you have them. To the people who trust you. To anyone whose picture of himself passes through your hands. Because what a man thinks of himself is what he becomes. And you are, in no small measure, one of the people deciding what the men and women around you think of themselves.